As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Happy Thursday, friends, and welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and here in Washington, D.C., we're celebrating tomorrow the 2022 March for Life. Of course, this has been an annual event since the Roe versus Wade decision happened in 1973, and pro-lifers from across the country are coming to Washington this week and are still here already to celebrate the advancements for protecting life. And of course, this year is very interesting for a couple of reasons. First, we are still waiting on the opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court in the Dobbs case and to see whether the Supreme Court will actually overturn Roe versus Wade this year. I have a lot of hope that they will. You can go back and listen to a couple of podcasts that I've done dispelling the two biggest myths on abortion and also breaking down the Dobbs decision the day that it was argued in the Supreme Court. The other interesting element this year for the March for Life, of course, is that Mayor Bowser in Washington, D.C., just last weekend on the 15th of January, implemented very severe COVID restrictions and the vaccine passport. So a lot of tension is happening in Washington, D.C., but that's not stopping the pro-life marchers. And of course, you can submit either a religious or medical exemption to the location as well as a negative COVID test. So don't make the mistake of assuming that everyone who is marching in DC or attending any of these events is vaccinated. A lot of people that have very genuine objections to the vaccine can still participate. I think it's ridiculous, these types of restrictions, especially with the data that we've seen over the last 2 years with COVID. But that's going to be another interesting element. But I think that's not going to stop a lot of people from coming to Washington, D.C. Reports are that over 50,000 people are expected to march, and that's great. So in just a few minutes, my good friend Abby Johnson, who of course you know as the former director of Planned Parenthood turned pro-life, she does a lot of great work. She's going to be joining me. But first, Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. And joining me now is my very good friend Abby Johnson, who you know is the former director of Planned Parenthood, now a staunch pro-life advocate, and the president and founder of And Then There Were None. She does so many great pro-life ministries, pro-life advocacy, and is here in Washington, D.C. for the march tomorrow. Abby, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting year, I think, for the march because we are pending the outcome of the Dobbs decision, and we're also in the midst of Mayor Bowser's really crazy, ridiculous COVID restrictions. What do you think is going to be the tenor of the march, and is that stopping any of the pro-lifers from coming and marching this year?
I hope not. I mean, I hope that I from what I can tell, people are still coming. People are still, deciding to sort of get around this COVID theater, which is what, a lot of us have been calling it. I think people are still coming. I mean, I think people are really energized knowing that Roe is potentially on its way out. And so I think people are feeling really excited about that. I mean, already I know people that are on their way in right now. And so I think there's just a really good energy right now, but also recognizing that even if we get the decision that we want in June, there's still going to be a lot to do. So, we can't just say, great, we got we got what we want in June. And so now, we put up our hands and we're done, right? Like abortion's done, right? Abortion's over with. We're still going to have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And unpacking that, a lot of legal scholars, including myself, do think that the Dobbs decision is going to go the way of protecting life, but likely will simply give the authority to determine abortion laws and abortion restrictions back to the states. So assuming that does happen, what is the game plan, or what would be the strategy for pro-lifers when now it's not as much a national conversation as much as it would be state by state?
Yeah, so as you know, Jenna, if Roe is overturned, which we're really praying and hoping that it will be, about half of the states in the country, abortion will be illegal. And so, then what? Well, many states have been preparing for this moment. So Texas was a great sort of, I think, case study for that, with the heartbeat legislation being passed. We have been preparing for what we've been calling a post-Roe world. And Texas being one of the largest states, we sort of, had a little preparatory time, I think. What's going to happen? Almost all abortion is banned in the state of Texas. We have 350 pregnancy resource centers that have really stepped up. They've, amped up their services. We're, taking women in, providing resources for them, even housing resources for them. We've done a great job in the state of Texas. So now it's going to be, okay, we've got, 25 other states that we've got to prepare and get ready. And that's exactly what they're doing. So these states are getting prepared. So, when that comes down, as we hope that it will, these states are going to be ready. And now we're going to have to shift our focus as activists, legal scholars like yourself. We're going to have to, really start taking our activism and our, put on our thinking caps and say, okay, how can we end abortion state by state now, right? We're going to have to get clever. We're going to have to really, I was just talking the other day. I was in New Mexico, and, New Mexico is really just a place of death. They've got terrible assisted suicide, euthanasia laws on the books. They've got terrible abortion laws. They've got a late-term abortion facility there in Albuquerque. And I said, you guys are right next door to us in Texas. So when abortion becomes completely illegal in Texas, because we have a trigger ban, I said, when that happens, we're going to have to start taking busloads of people over to New Mexico. We're going to have to start just, pounding the pavement in front of the abortion clinics there in New Mexico. We're going to have to take all of our activism, all of our advocates here in Texas, and we're going to have to start going to our neighboring states where abortion will still be legal. We're going to have to be, giving our expertise and just our time and our treasure to go state by state to then make abortion unthinkable and illegal in those states.
Yeah, absolutely. And my home state of Colorado is exactly the same, where, abortion is legal right up until the moment of birth. And we also have assisted suicide laws that passed very recently. And the trend, of course, in Colorado has been more liberal lately. But there are a lot of people, myself included, who are natives of Colorado, who've been there our whole lives and who are very invested in the people of the state of Colorado, the laws there, and who are very ardent pro-life advocates that are wanting to turn that tide. And I think, Abby, it does. A lot of it comes down to exactly what you just said, which is to make abortion unthinkable, because, the laws are there, and we obviously want to shape those to reflect moral truth. But if we were a moral and upright people, we would be constrained by the morality of the decision itself rather than necessarily being constrained by the law. And so if we can make abortion unthinkable and provide alternatives like what you do through so many of your ministries, to give young women the opportunity to see how their life can actually be enriched with unplanned pregnancies, and they can see that this is a human being made in the image of God and make better decisions, then that can actually help shape the landscape of abortion, even in states that we're still going to be actively working on the law. So what are some stories and some practical ways that you've seen that actually take place? Because I think a lot of people say, okay, well, we can talk to these young women, but obviously they need to also have the option of abortion.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, is that they really don't need the option of abortion. Abortion is not helping these women. There was I'm sure you saw it, so many of us did recently in New Mexico. A woman gave birth to a baby, and then she took her baby, wrapped it up in a towel, put it in a garbage bag, and then threw her baby into a dumpster. And really, only by the grace of God, did some people find that baby, that newborn baby, in a dumpster, heard that baby crying. And, it was heartbreaking. And thankfully, the baby was found. The baby was okay. They took the baby to the hospital. But, I was thinking just about sort of the society that we have created where, and like I said, this was in New Mexico, where you can legally abort a baby up until the moment of birth. And we've created a society where preborn children and newborn children and, children that are just born, children in general, are not valued in our society. They're not seen as valuable. And I was looking at some of the comments online, looking at some of the comments on social media, and I was really struck by this one comment. There was this woman she had a "I stand with Planned Parenthood" profile picture as her profile picture, but she was reaming this woman for dumping her newborn child in a dumpster. And of course, we're looking at this and we see it as just abhorrent, right? Of course, it's terrible that she would put her child in a dumpster, but of course we think that, because we think that a preborn child has infinite dignity and value, right? But here's a woman who publicly on her profile picture says she stands with Planned Parenthood, our country's largest abortion provider. And I'm thinking, we are living in times where people are so double-minded. And I'm thinking, how can you even slam this woman for doing this when you support an organization that is literally ripping babies apart, limb from limb, in their mother's wombs? And so we're just sort of living in a culture where we don't value the preborn. And when we don't value life in the womb, we just really sort of just as a byproduct, we really don't value their mothers, because we are telling these mothers that you are too weak to be a single mom. You're too weak to finish your education. You're too weak to handle the circumstances that have been given to you. And I can tell you honestly, Jenna, as a woman who, proudly proclaimed herself to be, a secular feminist the whole time that I worked at Planned Parenthood for those 8 years, there was never a time where I sat down with a woman and she was sitting in front of me and I said, gosh, I know you're really struggling. I know you're in a really difficult situation, but man, I see a really strong woman sitting in front of me and you can really overcome this adversity that's in front of you. Never one time did I say that to a woman. And I'm supposed to be this, this feminist, right? Who's empowering women. But every time a woman had this, was really in a situation where she was having to overcome adversity, every time she sat in front of me, I looked at her and said, essentially, man, you are so weak. And the only option I have for you is to oppress another human being and kill them. And that is the antithesis of empowerment. And that's really not what feminism was meant to be. We are never going to liberate ourselves. We can never call ourselves liberated as long as we are oppressing another population of human beings.
That is so well said, and it does highlight and emphasize the contradictions and the cognitive dissonance that so many feminists purport to deny, and they go forward and say we can be empowered by taking our lives into our own hands. But you're so right, Abby, that they ultimately, when it comes to abortion, act like they are the victims of their own circumstances. And of course, they point to the very, very, very small fraction of pregnancies that are conceived in rape or incest or other horrible ways. I mean, most of the abortions, and we've seen the statistics, are through consensual sex, and that they were just unplanned. And so women want to get abortions because it's convenient for economic purposes, for all kinds of other reasons. And even in those slim fractions of where the conception took place in a horrible circumstance, the solution is never to say, well, I will get out of my situation and I will stop being a victim by victimizing an innocent third party, that unborn child. And so the whole notion of feminism is completely a lie when it comes to abortion. I mean, obviously, there are ways that women should be treated as equals. In the workplace, for example, and a lot of other places, we definitely have biblical roles in terms of the church, and we can talk through all of those at a different time. But in terms of having equal dignity and worth and being co-inheritors of the kingdom of God, women and men are equal in that sense. But that's not what feminism says. And there is a marked difference between what the world projects for feminism versus valuing femininity. And so when you are teaching about life and the truth about life and how the science shows this, we've heard so often in the news that we are the pro-life generation, that the up-and-coming kids who are in college right now and who are learning about all of this have a visceral objection to abortion. But then if they are in that circumstance themselves, then they sometimes will overcome their instinctual objections and choose that anyway. And do you think that in your experience, is that because the church is failing? Is that because we aren't providing enough support around this topic in the church? Or what can we do as Christians when we are going to be faced with this on a state-by-state level and an individual level, if and when Roe versus Wade is overturned?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Jenna. And you and I have talked about this before. There's almost 60% of women having abortions are church-going Christian. So I'm not talking about, the woman who went to church once in her life and calls herself a Christian. Okay. I'm not talking about the woman who, went to church camp in junior high, had that moment of salvation under the tent, at the revival, got baptized and then never stepped foot in it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about almost 60% are actively attending church. These are the women who are walking in to have abortions. And people say to me, "Oh, that can't be, Abby. That can't be." Women who are actively in church would know better. They would know better than to have an abortion. And I'm like, really? How would they know better? How would they know better if we're not talking about it? How would they know better if we are not actively, as a church, participating in the solution to crisis pregnancies? If we're not discussing this, and really that could be said of any sin, right? Like that could be said of any Christian. Like, if I sin, anybody could say, "Oh, Abby wouldn't sin. She's a Christian. She should know better." Right? Like, we all should know better than to sin, but we do it anyway, right? We do it every day. And these women, sure, they know better, but many of them are frightened. They're vulnerable. They're feeling alone. 73%, there was a study done by the Elliott Institute several years ago that said 73% of women having abortions feel forced or coerced. These women have a lot of pressure, not to mention the societal pressure and just the normalization of abortion in our society. We have glamorized abortion in our society. We have normalized it. Dare I say, we have romanticized it. It's no big deal. Abortion's so simple. It's so easy. It's no big deal. Everybody's doing it. It's almost like a rite of passage for many women and in many circles. And
the whole shout your abortion. I mean,
yes, of course, shout your abortion. It's cool to have an abortion. And so these Christian women are walking into abortion clinics. They're having abortions, and they're being told by family, by friends, and even by some churches. I mean, while I worked at Planned Parenthood, I went to church every single Sunday. I went to a pro-choice church. I went to a church where our pastor was sending women to my office so that I could convince them to have abortions. There are many, many pro-choice denominations. There are many pro-choice churches. We need to be aware of that and understand that many women are being driven into abortion clinics by their own faith community. And so, the church has failed in a large way, in a huge way, because we are complicit, we are apathetic, we are not talking about these issues, and in some ways, we're even too fundamentalist. So, and I'm a very traditional person, okay, in my beliefs. So don't hear me wrong on this, but I remember even growing up, very Southern Baptist, and a woman would get pregnant out of wedlock, and the thinking was, well, we're not going to throw her a baby shower in the church because then we're celebrating her sin, right? But you're not celebrating her sin. You're celebrating the life that is within her. And if we're shaming women, then where are they going to go? They're going to go and abort that baby. And so, we've got to do a better job within the church. We're not celebrating sin, but we are celebrating that life. And we are celebrating the fact that she chose life, because she could have very, very easily have gone with that 60%, and she could have walked into an abortion clinic.
Yeah, and that's such a good word, Abby, because like you said, with any sin, it's not that we celebrate it, but we do walk with people where they're at and help them overcome and make the best decisions then after they have sinned and chosen sin. And we want people to have refuge in the church in terms of not just transparency with what they're dealing with in life, but also to make the best possible choices through working through their life. And there is this stigma that is attached to different kinds of sin, where Christians are often very hypocritical to say, well, I would never do something like that. Well, they're participating very openly sometimes and very actively in their own sin. And you're very right that the pastors of churches need to be teaching the truth, need to be standing firm on issues like pro-life, absolutely should not be complicit in any way or encouraging sin, but then also not shaming people for their sin. I mean, Jesus himself said, go and sin no more, but he accepted the sinners to himself because he knew it's the sinners, it's all of us who need Christ. And that's the brilliant, beautiful message of the gospel, is that there is nothing that you can do to separate yourself from the love of God, which is through Jesus Christ to the Father. There is nothing whatsoever that you have done or could possibly do. And that doesn't give us, go and sin because we have grace abundantly. No, there is a balance. But of course, we need to be actively participating in the lives of our fellow Christians. And when things like unplanned pregnancies happen, not shame these women, but encourage them to enjoy the life that God has given them, and see this as, even though the circumstances were unplanned, that this absolutely can and is and should be a blessing in their life. And there are so many different options, whether it's adoption, whether it's raising the child with family. I mean, there's so many different things. My own little brother, who I love dearly, he is a wonderful young man. His mother was an unplanned pregnancy, and she was unwed, and thankfully she chose life because my family has had the opportunity to have my brother be a part of our life and our family that I know God meant for him to be a part of our family before the foundations of the earth. He knew that my brother would be an Ellis and would be part of our family, even though the circumstances of his conception and birth were different than most families, and maybe not even most anymore, but of the traditional quote unquote family. That doesn't matter. His life is still valuable. His life is wonderful. And he has been such a blessing to our family because of the gift of adoption and the gift of life. And so as the church is looking at this, Abby, I think it's so important that pastors are willing to stand up and teach the truth, but in love and in grace and in encouragement to women. And, even looking at how incrementalism, a lot of conservatives are against things like the heartbeat bills, which kind of shocks me. But I see this so often where we are so staunch, all or nothing. And so if a heartbeat bill allows abortions even for 6 weeks, we can't support that because that's supporting abortion. And I think that's the wrong attitude towards this. What do you think about, or what's your answer to the Christians that push back on that?
I have to say, I understand the passion. I understand the heart behind it. I do. But we're seeing so much fruit from legislation like this. I think that just since September 1, we believe that the heartbeat bill has saved something like 15,000 babies from abortion. And how can I say that that's a bad thing, right? I mean, how can I say that that's a bad thing? Of course, we want every child to be saved from abortion. But even in the reality that abortion is made illegal in the state of Texas, we know that abortions will still be happening. There's never a perfect solution to ending sin, right? There's never going to be a perfect solution for ending our sinful ways and our sinful desires until Christ returns. And so the law is only a part of it. And so it's like what we talked about earlier. We have to continue to change the culture. And so I'm going to take the victories that come. I'm going to celebrate the victories that come. I mean, we are already in contact just through our ministry Love Line. We're already in contact with, hundreds and hundreds of women who have chosen life and who are currently pregnant right now with babies because of the Texas heartbeat bill. I'm not gonna turn my nose up at that, right? I'm not gonna say, well, it wasn't a perfect bill, so I don't care about those babies that are alive today. No, I'm gonna celebrate those lives, and I'm gonna continue to work for complete abolition of abortion in Texas and across our country. And I'm going to continue to work for culture change. Now, that is not to say that there are some bills that are deemed pro-life that I think are poorly designed bills. Okay? So there are some bills, for instance, there was a bill that was being put forward. It didn't go anywhere, but there was a bill that was put forward in a couple states a few years ago that was basically saying if you euthanize the baby before you kill it, then they would, then they were basically saying that this bill was going to kill babies before you dismember
Which
them.
is not pro-life at all. That's just yeah.
No, but that was a pro-life initiative that was being put forward in a few states. And I'm not one to really speak out negatively against pro-life bills. There's some that I'm not really for, like pain-capable bills. I think those are sort of a farce because I believe babies feel pain way before 20 weeks. So I think it's sort of setting a false standard. And anyway, babies are valuable even if they don't feel pain. So I'm not like a huge fan of pain-capable bills, but I don't come out against pain-capable bills. But this bill, these few bills that were coming out that were saying, well, we're going to put this bill out because we want to be able to kill babies before they're dismembered. That was actually a bill that I came out and said, this is a bad bill. This is not something that we should be supporting in the pro-life community.
Well, it's not pro-life by
definition. Not pro-life.
Yeah.
It's not pro-life. But it was being touted as a pro-life initiative. There are a few times where we have to really think and say, is this a good look? Is this a good idea for the pro-life movement? Is this actually pro-life? But in general, I think incremental legislation is fine as long as it's saving lives. And the heartbeat bill is saving lives. It's saving a tremendous amount of lives. And I think that's really what we have to focus on.
Yeah, that's a really good definition to say just because some legislature, some author of a bill labels it pro-life, that doesn't mean that it actually is. You have to read the text. You have to say, okay, what does this functionally do? And if the goal and the end result of the legislation is saving lives, then we can say, okay, it is pro-life. But in the description that you just gave, and I hadn't actually heard of bills like that, and that they were actually being labeled pro-life. I mean, that's just an alternative method of killing. It's maybe in a sense they're trying to tout that it's more humane because the babies don't feel pain, but the end result is still that the child is being aborted and killed. So clearly it's not pro-life. But in just the last few minutes that we have here, Abby, and I so appreciate your heart and your passion for your advocacy in pro-life, for your own personal testimony, and for how many women across the country that you continue to bless and impact through your ministries. And looking forward to this weekend. I think it's going to be a great turnout, and it's going to be really exciting to see that maybe 2022 is the year that the tide is turning, and we are going to be saving even more lives through the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so as you move forward into 2022 and your ministry, where can people, if they're listening to this podcast and, they're a woman in an unplanned pregnancy situation, they have a friend, they have a church member, someone who needs to hear from someone like you or benefit from a ministry, how can they contact you and where can they go?
Yeah, if they go to prolife.com, they can find out about both of my ministries. And I just want to say, our 24-hour crisis line is called Love Line. The website is loveline.com, and it's for anyone in crisis. So, and that I want people to remember that website, loveline.com. We have a texting line, we have an email, we have a hotline they can call 24 hours. It's for single parents, it's for single moms, for single dads, for women in crisis pregnancies, for victims of domestic violence, victims of sex trafficking. It's not just for women who are pregnant. It's for anyone who is in a state of crisis that needs help. So, we had a woman call in one time. She was checking out of a hotel and, she just asked the question as she was checking out, to the woman that was behind the desk, how are you doing today? And the woman just broke down in tears. And she was a struggling single mom of 3 children and her husband had just left her. And she just said, I'm so sorry. I can't stop, the tears. And the woman checking out was a pro-life woman. And she said, I know who you need to call. And she just called our hotline right then on the phone, right there as she was standing there. We got the woman into some transitional housing, got her some educational help, got her, we have scholarship, we have educational scholarships for moms and dads who want to maybe further their education. We got her some transitional financial help, got her back on her feet, and just right there, as she was checking out of her hotel. So I want people just to keep that just on the forefront of their mind, loveline.com. There's so many people that are out there in need of help. If you run across someone who's homeless and they have children with them and you think they need help, anybody who's in a state of crisis, we can help at loveline.com.
That's so great, Abby. And thank you so much for your ministry, your dedication to the Lord, and for marching this weekend. And I will be hoping and praying with you that our country returns to the Lord and to the truth, and that we continue to make abortion unthinkable. And thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Of course. Thanks so much.